Okay, hello and welcome. It's 1 o'clock. We're going to get started. Welcome to our weekly Learn How to Identify Bees with a Microscope. I'm Clare Maffei. I'm from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. My pronouns are she, her. And Sam is from USGS. He'll be speaking in a little bit. And we're joining you. Yes, so I wanted to do a couple of housekeeping announcements before we get started. I think everybody by now should have received a welcome packet with some of the bee genera and microscope information. If you haven't, send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat and I can get that to you. We are also, please be patient with us as we have this transparent learning process of how to set up these workshops. We have not yet uploaded last week's, but by the weekend, hopefully by tomorrow, both last week and this week will be up. See, we have not resolved it yet. We're working on it. Wait for that. And finally, I've set up a Microsoft Teams team that might make it easier for us to share resources as a group as we grow. So that might take me a week or so to set up, and it might also change the invitation address to this meeting. So again, something else to look forward to in your email inbox. Sam, was there anything else?
Specimens?
Oh, specimens. Yes.
Goodie bag specimens.
Goodie bags. So at the Bee Lab, we have a lot of excess specimens, just extra stuff. So if you are interested in getting a small box of absolutely random bees, I think maybe we have a couple of themes. Okay, there's a little bit of theme. Then we can mail those to you. Again, I am the facilitator for these. So you should send all questions to me with your address and what you need. So we won't really probably be able to give you super specific bees and species, but like I said, a nice smattering of things that we're going to be going over here. Was that all?
I think so.
All right. And with that, if there's any questions, comments, concerns, put them in the chat. This is a participatory meeting. We really need your comments. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Okay, well,
oh, I'm connected.
You're connected. Okay. Oh, we're back. Incredible. All right. And it looks like my I'm off mute. All right. Thank goodness. We have no idea what happened there, but maybe you heard all our panicky chatting. All right. So let me back up and say, okay, something was happening. I think we're good. Let me just back up what Claire was saying. It's really useful to have a box of bees that are already identified, and the bees that we'll send you all have identifications with them. And we attempted to maximize the diversity of different species in genera in those boxes. Thank you, technicians and volunteers here at the lab. And we will just mail them to you. So email Claire if you want them. And just again, to just follow up on that, it's important because as you begin to use the guide, you will come up with answers. But if you have no reference material or are not used to the guide itself, you often will end up an answer, but you have no idea whether it's correct or not. So going through the guide several times with a whole bunch of different species, when you know the answer, allows you to keep checking yourself as you progress through. Okay, so what we're going to do today, I'm going to share my screen, is go to, oh, there's my email, is go to the bee genera. So we're assuming that people have been involved in the last two sessions, but I'm going to gently move us back in and walk through what we did last time in terms of an identification stream using a different Agapostemon species. So we're at the genus guide. You can see the URL up here. I think people know that you type in discoverlife.org, click on the bumblebee, then jump to bee genera, and then you're on this guide. This would be where you are if you are following along directly or are going to follow along afterwards. And we were looking at a specimen of Agapostemum splendens last time. I've got Agapostemum virescens now. If you were looking at the genera cheat sheet, you saw that basically if you have a bright shiny green bee with a raised carina around the rear face of the propodium, that's all you need to know.
We are not seeing your microscope screen. We are just seeing
Discover Life.
Discover Life.
Yeah, I'm not showing anything yet. So
okay, I'm not seeing that. I am seeing a screen of.
There's the microscope, but so are you seeing what I'm doing? Okay. All right, there's the microscope screen, but I'm just talking about the guide at the moment. So I'm going to keep the guide screen up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. We also have construction going on here. So if you hear any cursing, it's not us. So anyway, I will be flipping to the back and forth between the microscope screen and this. I just want to parse through where we are to catch people up who have not been on the first two sessions. So now we're at the genera guide in Discover Life. Again, these are covered in detail on the first two sessions, which will be up. And we have a specimen, which you can't see yet, but I'll show you. And as we go through the guide, you have answers, in this case, genera, on the left, questions on the right. And if we look through here, we could click on Eastern United States because that's specimen has come from Maryland, I think. And we can then hit search after we click on that, and we have 68 kinds. In an exploratory fashion, I could click Ireland and Great Britain if I wished, and I can see the 28 genera from that area. But we're going to focus on this as an actual specimen. And the idea is to explore the different identification characters, not to just immediately jump to an answer. Later, as we get more familiar with the genera guide and some of the features, we can shortcut all that and really focus more and more on quick paths to the answers about what the bee genera are. So now we know we have a specimen from Maryland. Okay, so how many, in this case, genera are listed as being possibly seen in Maryland. Again, I emphasize this is not the absolute list of bee genera found in Maryland. This is the estimate by us of what bee genera could be found in Maryland. Use things like maps and other ways of looking rare, like Dianthidium, to determine if it's likely that you had that thing. So 55 in there. Okay, that's a gimme. We know where it was collected, so we're going to add that. We're going to skip over the family level information because we aren't sophisticated enough yet to know which family we're looking at. But we could, and you could play around like, oh, what are the coletids found in Maryland? And it's 2. So there's no harm in clicking things on, clicking things off. There's additional shortcuts. We talked about that last time. There's tribal members here that we could explore, and you can, again, can play around with these and use this. This is a learning tool as well as an identification tool. This is just a note about how to sex specimens, and I'm going to now flip to the, because this is important because we spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether it's a male or a female, or we always do a male or female notion when we are doing an identification, because the stream for identification for males is different from females. So I'm going to flip to the microscope here, and I'm going to focus it, and theoretically, should have had this set up beforehand. There's the head, okay? So effectively, most of the time, you're going to count antennal segments. All right, and we still have this kind of lousy pointer, but it should be visible on the dark colors. This is the first antennal segment. The scape, the small segment between the scape and the flagellar segments, is the pedicel. And so there's a set of flagellar segments. Those are the ones you usually end up counting, because this is a gimme. There's always a scape and a pedicel. And the number of flagellar segments are going to tell us whether the female groups that you're going to run across commonly. The exception is Holcopocites, which is rare and uncommon. Both male and female have 12 specimens. So I hope you don't hear all that drilling as much as I do, but that's the way it is sometimes. Okay, we're going to run up the magnification, and we're just going to count segments, and we'll bring this up several times. The problem is, of course, that the antenna curves. So pedicel here, and then we have antennal segments following that. And like I mentioned last time, a lot of time the configuration and the relative lengths and widths of these first 3 antennal flagellar segments are important. But right now we're just going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see if I can do this by changing the focus. There's 5, 6, 7, 8. I can't really see the tip, but let's see if we can. We're going to change this. So normally you'd be doing this by holding the specimen and rotating it with your finger. So it's more difficult when we're looking on the microscope. And I'm spending time here because people do have to spend a fair amount of time. So here's the last flagellar segments. There's one. It's barely in focus there. You can see the line, the suture line, that's separating the segments out, and you would just count those. And you would come up with the notion that this specimen has 12 antennal segments, and the 12 number includes the scape and the pedicel, and that would make it a female. Later, as you get more experience, you would just eyeball an agaposmin and know it's a male or female based on the size and shape, and whether it's got pollen collecting hairs back here. There are pollen collecting hairs on this female or not. But a lot of that, surprisingly, we still spend quite a bit of time on some specimens that we're not very familiar with counting antennal segments. So it's the skill that lets you know. If there was a sting, it would be a female. If there were genitalia hanging out, it would be a male. Okay, so now we're going to flip back to the guide. We know it's a female, so that's going to be useful. We know it's bright, shiny race car green. Again, we're covering ground that we did last time. We're just going to go through these characters, even though we already know the answer. And this is how you would do with a specimen that you got, right? You got a specimen. It has you know what the identification is. You can keep checking to see that your, in this case, agaposmin stays on the list. And if you have questions about any of these, again, you can play investigator by clicking things on and clicking things off and seeing what happens with that. Okay, so let's go to this next one, which is basically where we stopped. Thorax or abdomen markings on the surface, not the hair color. So here we say there are none. The entire segment is black, brown, metallic, or the abdomen alone is red. There's no cream colored markings or anything else like that, like there would be in other species. Over here, bright yellow, white, or red, rarely entirely red markings on the thorax and the abdomen. So in this case, it's none. It's basically, as you can see, this abdomen on this agaposmin species, which is different from other species, is dark. And a female agaposmin, and it's all dark abdomen, you know it's agaposmin virescens already. So those are just, the start of many shortcuts to the identification of bees where you don't actually have to go through this whole process. Again, we're doing it so you learn things. So anyway, we know it's that one, and it didn't help us that much. There's still 6, but we're continuing on. Axilla shape, we talked about this a bit last time. If it's pointing out, it's only a small number of species have this pointed axilla, this thing right here next to the scutellum. Let's see if we can find ours. Ours is not going to be pointing out. It's going to look more like this one, not these points. That's a scutellum. It's going to be an axilla that will not show up very much because the tip is conforming to the scutellum and to the general flow of those segments. So it's basically a character that's useful if it's pointy and sticking out, and not that useful if it's the opposite. But again, you use these guides and develop these guides however is useful for you. So if we zoom in here, and I'll point out the different segment we're learning to. Got to get in focus. So the pin is, as it almost always does, goes through the scutum. This is the biggest chunk on top of the thorax. There's a tegula. That's a wing cover for the forewing. There's the hind wing. It does not have a wing cover or tegula. The next segment down from the scutum is the scutellum. Here, over here, tucked away, is that axilla. And you see it doesn't stick out anywhere. In fact, it's often difficult to see because it's so innocuous. It's not presenting in any particular way. This next segment down is the metanotum. And just so we'll continue this metanotum. And next one after is the propodium. And the propodium has a dorsal surface, and sometimes we call this the dorsal triangle up here, and it has a rear face. And sometimes it's a smooth transition, but in agapostomum, there is, let me show this a little bit better, this magical raised line, usually described as a carina in the technical literature. You can kind of see it. We'll probably see this from several different angles. This is raised. It's a raised line around, and as if you were to look, and I'll drop the focus down a little bit here. A little hard to see, but again, we'll try for different angles. This raised line goes all the way around the rear face, and it's actually a rather sharp, abrupt transition between the dorsal surface and the rear face. This carina going all the way around makes that an agapostomum, particularly in conjunction with the bright green. So now let's go back to the guide. So we've realized that we have a rear margin that is the same. Again, still 6 kinds, not useful in this particular situation, but it's, you know, you're learning, so you will develop your path through these guides. I would be tempted, for example, right now to simplify the guide because I already have just 6 left. We started out with whatever that was, 200 genera. But I want to go through these top ones so that you learn about the characters. So wing submarginal cell number. So in this case, it's going to be 3, and we'll look at this thing here. So the submarginal cells are sub or below or near. You know, there's different meanings in my head to what sub means in bee taxonomy lingo, but I think it usually means near. I could be wrong. Put that in the chat box. Correct me. So here's a marginal cell right here. Okay, it's on the margin of the wing. Good name. Submarginal, below the marginal cell. 1, 2, 3 in that case. And then when we look at other species, there's just 2. And then rarely we have the situation, I believe in Perdita, where you have just 1. But it's usually 2 or 3. And you can see from these numbers, the most common case is 100. Is 3. And then 2 is only 1. There's only 2 cases with only 1 submarginal. Additionally, you have, because we're working at the genera level, that means you have a whole bunch of species who may have different characters within that same genus. So Andrena, for example, some have 3, some have 2. So they would be scored for both. Let's look on our specimen now. Here's our agapostumum, and here is a very beat up wing. So when you see a wing like this, look at the edge of that wing. That's an old bee. It's been out and about. It's a female, so it's been going in and out of its nest, gathering pollen and nectar, and the tips of that wing have been hitting the ground and taking a hit. It's a rough life for bee wings. And essentially, the older it gets, the more and more ragged. You can go down to about 1/3 of the wing, and then it stops being able to fly whatsoever. It's a simple way of aging your specimen. Okay, here's the margin. This is probably the hind wing sticking out behind. This is the stigma, this dark area. We're not going to talk about that per se, but it's usually right there in some form. Marginal cell. Here's a little clipped end, which in some species is diagnostic, versus an end that goes and dives right into the edge of the margin. Submarginal cells.
Sam,
yes.
I ask you to close your right-hand screen?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me make this bigger. Oh, look at that. Amazing. So here's the 3 submarginal cells. And we will approach these other veins. They're useful under other circumstances later, but we'll concentrate on the fact that we have 3 submarginal cells here. And so when we click that, there's our friends fixing our bee lab. Now we're down to 4. Okay, so the other 2 species, which we can look at, right, because we can click this back on, and we see that Hoplites and Osmia, which are a different family and have 2 submarginals, drop out when we do that thing. 2 submarginal cells, and any bee is always useful to click there because it does separate out a lot of things. Okay, this character here throws a lot of people and at the same time is very useful, so separating out lots of members that bees that are in Halictidae from almost all the other bee species. So it says wing basal vein of forewing. Let's flip back here to, so the basal vein is really not on this, but I'm going to move this over here. And this is the basal vein here. So I think, you know, it's the closest to the base in this floating vein area. You're seeing a couple veins below here that are part of the hind wing that are showing through the forewing, but this is the vein we're talking about. This is the basal vein. And if we go back to this set of pictures here, the 2 choices, gently and uniformly, this is key, that's why it's highlighted. That's our bold thing. Arched or straight throughout its length versus lower portion strongly bent or arched. So in this case, all those species are actually in this Halictidae group, and so it does nothing. But in other cases, you might have a genus or a specimen that where the basal vein shape is going to be important for splitting out Halictidae, which there's not that many, only 27 here, from all the others. So let's go back and look at what a sharp versus gently arched throughout thing is. And we'll look at this in several different ways in different groups. So if you look, this is straight and there's this sharp curve at the bottom. Okay, so the alternative is not a simple straight line, which is the case in some cases because nature doesn't do straight lines a lot of times. So often what you'll see in a non-halictid group B is that the vein, this basal vein, is going to do some kind of like slow arch up there. Not exactly straight, but it also doesn't have this, quick twist down that you see in this vein. So this right here, that's a sort of signature of most Halictidae, most species in Halictidae. Is it absolute? No, of course not, because nature, messes things up in these absolute senses. So in Eastern North America, if you look at Nomia, for example, this is ambiguous, whether there's an arch or not. So we score it for both. But in a lot of the other groups of bees, this is really apparent. Okay, so that's a good learning character, but doesn't really help because we've already gotten to this without even having to use this character. But again, you choose the characters. So if you were looking at your bee and you saw that basal vein thing, you can certainly jump right down to this character, click it, and look at see what happens. Almost always you're going to click on the geographic area. All right, here is a character that is theoretically important, but in actuality, many people end up really never using it. So wing jugal to vanal lobe ratio. So I should put, jugal to vanal lobe should tell you it's the hind wing, but this is actually the hind wing. That's a note to myself that I should mention that this is the wing, hind wing, not the forewing. So let's see if I can switch to the microscope here, and I'm going to bring in a male agapostomum because it has some good hind wing visibility, and we can also check out what the vibe is on our, let's talk vibe. So the males in almost all agapostomum are going to look something like this, which is basically, oh, there is some bright, shiny green stuff going on here in the head and the thorax, but, and I could be wrong, I think on the West Coast, there's quite a bit of metallic on the abdomen, but basically most of them have a black, yellow, cream set of markings on them, and that designates them as males. If you knew that they were agapostomum, but you can vaguely see here's the carina around the rear face on this agapostomum too. But importantly, it's got its wings, its hind wings sticking out, and its forewings are somewhere else. So we're gonna use this bad boy as a model for learning about hind wings. And we'll also talk about why people rarely use these things. Okay, so lobes, when it talks about vanal and jugal lobe, I don't know the derivation of the names. This is the jugal lobe. You can kind of see it vaguely here. It's basically just a lobe without any veins associated with it, although sometimes there's veins leading to it. And here's the vanal lobe. So this ratio of the length, so there's a base over here somewhere, the length of the vanal to the length of the jugal separates out big chunks of bees often. Here's the problem. This, the hind wing often gets stuck to the forewing, gets stuck to the side of the abdomen, gets twisted and bent and messed up because of how you processed it. This Banal lobe often will fold along its little foldy line. My phone is ringing. How can I stop that? I don't know. It may have to ring. This is very amateur hour here in in some of our presentation on Zoom. I should have done something about that, but obviously I have not. So this will fold over, and it gets very confusing because you can't see that fold very well. And it's like, I only see this banal lobe. So bottom line, often really difficult to observe this area because of the presentation of the character by the bee. But on the other hand, it's used by taxonomists all the time because it is often a highly discriminatory. So some species have very short jugal lobes. So the banal, the jugal is, very different from something like this, where it's quite extensive jugal lobe to banal lobe ratio. So let's go back to the guide. And here we have, and I have to say that I never use this character. So wing jugal to banal lobe ratio, at least nearly 3/4 as long. And I would say that is the case. Let's see if I'm right about that. And yes, okay, it acknowledges that these have all been scored as having a jugal to banal lobe of 3/4, but let's say less, usually much less than 2/3 as long. I'm going to say those are probably, like Agaposmin, that one did not seem less than 2/3, but let's see if it's scored for that. And it is. And the reason we do this is there might be a species that had that character or that were closer to this, or was ambiguous as to which. And so when we do the scoring for a group like Agaposmin, we're going to do it very conservatively. So in this case, wing ratio thing is not hardly useful at all for a lot of this. In fact, it does nothing for us. The only thing it would do is if we said, oh, I don't see a jugal lobe, and we click that, then, oh, wait a minute. Why is that? It should, hang on for a second. Those should have disappeared. So now I'm a little confused because please all have jugal lobes. And 2 have been recorded as having it. So when I click on that and click that, it should say there are no species that have that situation. I'll have to investigate, but something is messed up there, because that should have created a zeroing out of all these species. All right, so moving on to leg aurolium. So the aurolium is a little tiny pad, and we'll click on, I guess, this picture here. A little tiny pad. It's a physical pad between the 2 tarsal claws of the leg or legs. And usually the presence or absence is uniform across all 3 legs, but effectively you look at whatever leg is easiest to see in silhouette in your computer. You can see from some of these pictures what this might look like. I think we scroll down here. So the pads have different shapes, but it's a physical thing. Sometimes there's little clumps of hairs, like you see hairs down here, that may look pad-like, but yet. So if we look at the absent character, here's the hairs, but there's no pad when looking at it. So aurolium is something that I use fairly frequently if I see it does not have it. So if we look here, and I'm going to click search, which should bring back our 4, okay? And here's aurolium. So absent, only 24 have it absent. 133 have it present. So most bee genera, therefore, have an aurolium. But if you see one that doesn't, that's often a good character. And now I'm going to cross my fingers that the guide hasn't decided to lock up. So if I click that one as absent, these should all disappear. All right, let's do that. And there you go. Why that didn't work up here, I'm not sure, but.
And they didn't.
Sorry?
I made a note of it for us to check.
Okay, we're going to check.
Also a time check, it's 1:35, but we don't have any questions, thank you.
Okay. So we're going to keep going, but again, this is, feel free to ask questions about these kinds of things. So here, this is what happens when you choose something that the group that you're looking at does not have. Like you might say, oh, I think that's an aurolium. And you click it and like, oh, everything disappears. And then now, that could mean a couple things. One, you incorrectly identified it as having an aurolium, as not having an aurolium when it actually did, or the guide is wrong. Most of the time, the guide is not wrong, but some of the time it is. So if you feel like there's a mistake, which there are, let us know. And the good thing is we can change the changes pronto online, because the guide is an online presentation. We can do it from any computer. So if we click it off, so again, it never hurts to do these exploratory things. Oh, well, I'm not sure. What happens if I click it as absent? And you can see like, oh, I guess that was maybe the wrong thing. So here we click it as present, but it doesn't really do anything because it's not separating those four. But again,
back to the microscope screen and actually
show
it.
I'll show it. Yeah, good idea. All right, here's the microscope, and we will. So often, what you'd have to do is get a foot. That's not a good technical term. A leg in silhouette. Which did I? Okay. All right, that's silhouette from the side.
Twisting.
Keep twisting.
Try that.
Try right there. Okay. Oh, upper right. Oh, I see it. Yeah. All right. Let me go more magnification. And oh, we have two legs of slightly different viewpoints. So here's tarsal claws, and note that there's these two parts to these claws. Sometimes the shape of the tarsal claws is useful in some characters that we'll go through. Here, though, is the aurolium pad, right? Very obvious. On this one, which I'll bring into focus, from a slightly different angle on the underside, this is the upper side, you can see the aurolium pad too, and hair sticking down. So there's a visual on the aurolium. Okay, now we go back, and it's present, but it doesn't really matter whether we click it on or off, because, oh my God, that grinder is loud. Okay, now it's off. And because it's not helping with these four. Again, we should at this point have hit simplify, but I want to just go through the guide here a little bit on some of these characters. When I pointed out on that microscope picture, the tarsal claws, you can have tarsal claws with different teeth here or no teeth. So they would call that the simple state. So instead of having two prongs, projections, whatever you want to call them, it would just be one. So I think, let's see if it's still there. Yeah, you can see one, two things, divisions on these claws. So it would be that one, and which is the more common state, 65. And once again, it does nothing for us here, but it does for other species group become useful. Lengths are also available. Agapostomum is it's bigger than these others on average, but it probably would not show up. Let's see if we hit, it's a female, let's say that's 10 millimeters. Again, we'll come back and we'll talk about measuring length, but let's say it's 10 millimeters. Let's see what happens. No, they're still all there, because you can get some big specimens of some of the others, and we're super conservative on these lengths because, one, hard to measure lengths because the bees are usually curled up, and two, you have a bunch of species in each of these categories, and they often have different sizes. So, but probably, let's see if we go to 12 millimeters, which is pretty darn big. Yeah, so Algochloropsis and Agaposmin stay in. The other two, which are generally smaller, drop out. But a lot of time, because of this overscoring, and you're dealing with the genus, this is not useful character for the males or the females unless you have extremes. This is, I've got a giant bee, then it's useful. I got a really tiny bee, then this is useful. But I've got a middling bee, probably not going to do much for you. Okay, we're going to bring back into existence these three, and let's flip back to the microscope and talk about how would you measure that bee. So one problem is that while some microscopes have measuring tools, and a digital thing like this would have a measuring tool, and you could just measure it there, but a lot of microscopes don't. And then you have the general problem of, see this head? So this head is cocked out, and it also could be cocked down. So this face could be at right angles to this line of, the body line. And so this is longer in that position than it is if it was bent down. And this abdomen is all curled up. So if I measure from there to there, it's certainly shorter than if that abdomen was bent up and straightened. As someone who often works in museums, they would have straightened that abdomen out. So again, that means that you could have several different possible measures of the length of this bee and be correct at the same time. So what do I do? So in general, I don't do it on the microscope because it's too slow. I still use lengths because often within these large groups, the length of the bee at the extremes, very large, very small, is useful in separating out things. And Drina, I do it all the time because there's a huge range in sizes. So I almost always measure the length. I literally will take let's see, this is what I use here. Can you see this? Can they see that?
What are you?
I'm showing a ruler.
Oh, yes, we can see a ruler.
Okay,
It's
so,
clear, so
all right, I don't know, I can't tell. I don't see me at all. So I'm holding a ruler in my hands, and it's clear because that's useful. And then I will take the specimen, which I will do now, and I literally hold it up, and I'm using it, backlighting it against the screen of the computer because it makes it easy to see, and silhouettes the bee itself. And I'm going like, okay, I'm going to, in my imagination, unbend that, abdomen a little bit. I'm going to add a couple millimeters to that measure, and I'm going to say, oh, you know what? I would say probably that's close to 12, but because this is using a ruler just against the specimen is clearly a crude measure, I'm going to almost always, when I do a measurement, not use one value, but a series of values. Like it could be somewhere between 10, 11, 12, or 11, 12, 13. It depends on the specimen and how well I feel I can estimate with a ruler what that measure is. So that's a little treatise on how we do the measurements. And again, because we want you to get the right answer versus being pristine in our measurements for, say, a taxonomic revision, we're going to what we call overscore things like this, where there's a range. So we'll bump it out a millimeter, sometimes 2 millimeters, so that you're really relatively safe in your measurement and in scoring for this. So again, useful at big and little, not so useful in the middle for the genus guide. All right, and then we have now reached the end of the guide. So it would seem this is actually just the end of the guide on the front page. There are no more characters below this, but yet we have 4 genera that our specimens still could be based on what this first guide has told us. We've clicked everything that we could do that's not some insider pool on, oh, I know it's an algochlorine thing. So at this point, what we could do, well, we could give up, but we're not. We're going to hit the simplify button here, and the simplify button takes these 4 genera or whatever genera are up there, and it recreates an entirely new guide. Okay, so now we have a guide to these 4 genera, and it's dropped any character from the guide that's not useful in separating out these genera, and it's added in a set of hidden characters in the back of the guide that are useful in showing these. So because the genera guide has, I don't know, 200 to 300 characters to handle everything, we don't put them all up on the front page because it'd be too much. And then you spend all your time kind of plowing through everything. So the simplify button has to be there to be helpful. Now, at the same time, you can, as we talked about in the very first time, you can start playing around with some of these mapping features, looking at images and thumbnails, and it will show all of these together. And to refresh, and then you could just do an eyeball, which is not a bad thing. Like often there's a vibe for each of these groups that it pays to begin to get a feel for. And so the pictures often illuminate that to some extent. Additionally, we may have some insider information, and we know that there is no way that the specimen we have been looking at is Algochloropsis. So we could drop it, and we could hit search again, and it would, or simplify again, and would create a new guide of just those 3. So I'm going to leave it in right now for purposes of today, but you can play around with dropping things out and dropping them in, and you can always go back and click restart to start the guide completely over. And I have a general rule for people, because there are so many options and so many ways to look at these things, is that when you're starting out, you get 10 minutes. Like if you haven't come to an answer or the answer in 10 minutes, put that specimen down and pick up another one. You don't want to spend 2 hours, which people have done, on one specimen trying to ID it, because you clearly are lost. Pardon?
Why are you calling me out like that?
And don't be like Claire, is what Claire is saying. But we all want to do that. Like we all get obsessed by, I got to figure this out. But really it does, and it's hard to do, right? To put it down. Just put it down and go to another one, because by plowing through a whole bunch of specimens, particularly if you know what they are, you start to get a feel for the characters and the boundaries for some of these divisions, because the next specimen might be a way better one to illuminate that. And you'll start seeing patterns like, oh, I'm seeing a whole bunch of this one kind of thing. I know a little bit about bees, and I know that this genera is very common, so that might be more likely it. You just want to continuously turn over specimens and look at a lot of them when you're starting out. You don't want to do, so, different people have different ways of thinking about everything. So some people are like, I'm in the trenches, I'm just going to keep digging. I'm just arguing that it's way better to flit around and look at a lot of specimens and put them down and not worry initially about like feeling like you nailed the identification, because nobody nails identifications initially. So it's better though to gain a broad experience in looking at lots of specimens and lots of species, and then coming back and redoing them all again. Or after a while, it's like, I know that this is a honeybee. They go over there. And then I know that this is Bombus impatiens. They go over here. And you start narrowing down the possibilities, and you gain experience, similar to bird watching. Oh, I know now the robin song. That was like a robin song, but not. So maybe it's a scarlet tanager. So you're doing the same thing, but you can't just sit there and look at that robin all day long wondering what it is. It's not useful. Similarly, you have lots of specimens to identify, so you want to really, plow through many of them, even if you're not getting correct answers, because you need to build an experience pool for something that you have no native background in. Okay, off the soapbox now. Now, since we didn't, here's the length of the bee and length of the female again. We didn't initially do anything with them on that first round, so we left them alone. But here it's reprocessed them, because there are differences between the 4 groups. And you can see that the list of measurements of the lengths of these bees is now truncated. You don't see those really 20+ millimeter ones because none of them have that. And you see basically a 3 to 13 millimeter size range. And you can see from the green scorings now that in the middle, they're all 4 are in this. If you click on a 7 to 8 to 9 millimeter one, all 4 are that way. But if it's like, oh, you know what, that's clearly, like we saw, that's clearly a 10 millimeter long one, then theoretically, and it did, thank goodness, one of them drops out. And when you do this, you don't have to have all of them drop out. It's useful to do something that drops out something.
10 minutes.
10 minutes left. Okay. And maybe I'll be able to finish the agapostumum.
I think so. And then we have one thing that would like to be shown with just your face, not the microscope and whatnot. So
All right, we can do it.
That's the only question in the queue right now.
All right. So again, if we were doing measurements, we probably would do something like, oh, it's around 10, but I'm going to score it for 9, 10, 11. That's conservative. You won't really want to be guessing. You want to be conservative because you can always go back and do it again. But not knowing all these things, it's now all 4 are back again. But if it was really big and you were confident in your measurement, it would drop out more and more of these green bees just on length alone. Here's a optional shortcut. We were looking at that before. You have 2 different subgenera groups and not subgenera, subfamily, or even I forget the categories. Anyway, you have these things that would be useful if you knew what those things were. Mostly you don't. So here is agapostumum versus selected other genera. Now, theoretically, you did not know that it was an agapostumum. So you would like, okay, well, this is one of the characters. I wonder if it's an agapostumum. You would read this, rear face, upper podium, circled or bordered by a clearly defined raised line. Oh, here is a picture, by the way, nicer than the one I could show you in the microscope of that clearly raised line. And, it talks about more details there. And the selected other genera basically do not have that carina. It's it's mostly smooth. There might be short carinae up from the bottom, which often bees have, but it doesn't have that circular one. So you're like, oh gosh, mine has that. And then boom, there's your answer. So in the theoretical sense, you would stop there, right? Because you have your answer, and it seemed like a really firm thing. You might go to the agapostumum genera guide, go like, oh, yeah, definitely in an area that has lots of agapostum. It's not some crazy, weird, rare thing. Here's some notes about the identification. You might read that and say, yes. Here's some pictures. You might look at it and say, yep, could be, and more information further down. As you get to species level, this becomes more useful because you'll see original descriptions. We're trying to get all the literature in. We're always interested in more literature. So if you have literature scanned and OCR, send it to us and we'll post it to the species pages for these specimens. We're also always interested in more pictures of bees, if you know what they are. And we'll also add them to the guide. At the genus level, it tends to be very broad, though. But we can go back, and sometimes we run into a problem when we've jumped to one of these pages. I should have clicked it on pop-up, and it says document has expired, and that may be what's going to happen here. I'm going to hit try again, and because it lost track of, oh, maybe it's working. Let's hit search. Sometimes it keeps, oh, nope, it worked here. Other browsers, it doesn't work. But, keeping track of where it was when you went off and looked at, one of these species pages or genera pages is tricky for the guide sometimes. We ask a lot about the guide. Okay, so this gave us the answer, but we can look at these other things. Here is, and these are often useful for background information. So when you're starting out, often you might want to look at a lot of these characters to bring yourself up to speed on some of the general differences between bee groups. So Algochlarini versus other halictid genera. So the Algochlarini group is everything except for Agapostomum. They share the character of being bright, shiny green, but technically they're in two different groups. And you can see here some of these differences in the slits of the females on the back here. And you could say, oh, I'll take a look at that and see if I can find it. Let's see if we can find this character. Oh, that's the male. This character on the female. 5 minutes? Okay, I'll do this character and stop. How about that?
Okay, we only have one question, but I would like to make sure if anybody has any questions, while we still have the microscope and key screen up, because it's tricky to then go back to that once we show your face.
So here,
put those in the chat if you have them.
Okay, quick. So here is the character. It's a little dark, but this is the character. I'm going to flip back to here. We are looking at, so this kind of slot, it's not completely cut through like it is in the Algochlarini group, has a cleft, they call it. This is more of just a slot inside with no cleft at the end. And there it is right there. So I'm going to stop. As you can see, there's, lots to think about and learn when you're dealing with an entire group of creatures that are not part of our day-to-day civilization understanding of how bees work. And Claire, what do we got in terms of a question?
I have one question before we switch to showing you. Catherine Busby, do you want to, I said it so people can unmute. Do you want to unmute and clarify your question, please?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I was just wondering if, since you mentioned the Algochlarini that had this like female.
Oh, am I? Boy, yeah. Got it. Sorry, my speaker is not on. All right. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay.
Okay. Since you mentioned the trait where the female has a certain slit if it's Algochlarini, I'm wondering what do you do if the specimen that you have is the wrong sex for the character that you're looking for? Is there always another character to look for in the opposite sex, or what do you do in that case?
Yeah, so in that case, if you had a male, then you wouldn't use that character, right? So that's the thing about these matrix guides to sort of wrap your head around, which is I'm going through things very sequentially, which is a sort of a dichotomous mindset. But normally you don't. You jump around and, everyone at some point starts skipping, like, I don't like that, or I know that that's not useful, or this is not my favorite. I see this specimen has this feature, which I know will split out a lot of things. So you would do that. But at the same time, hopefully, the males and females are always, there's always a path to an identification of a species, whether it's a male or female. So in the Agapostomum, it doesn't matter. The males and females both have that carina. In the other Algochlarini groups, theoretically, there are other characters in the guide, and we'll be hitting those and going through, first of all, anyone pretty much throughout, well, I'm not going to say, in the East, you're dealing with tons of green bees. Algochlorella aurata is the most commonly captured thing in our database, but Algochlora pura is also right in there. So we'll show you a bunch of shortcuts for IDing those that are not even really, that are mentioned in the guide, but become something that are useful to go through quickly. So I'm going to say, yes, if you had a male, you would get to an answer, even though that particular character is just for females. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, last call for questions that need the microscope or the key open. Cool. So Sam, will you stop sharing your screen? And there are people who would like to see your method of measuring a bee with the ruler.
All right. All right. Have I stopped sharing?
You have stopped sharing.
Right.
And if you are in
I
gallery,
think-
I would recommend putting it so that clicking those dots up in the right and making it so you see the presenter, so you can see him as clearly as possible. It might also show up in a second screen if you do so. So those are your
Right.
troubleshooting options for that, but he should be on your screen right now.
I want to see myself too, so I can make sure I'm doing this right. How do I get there, Claire? I turned off. Oh, it's still in gallery mode. Do I click it off?
Click that.
It stays on.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
I'm not sure you can do that because you
Okay.
are.
Oh, maybe because I'm a
yourself.
presenter.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you're down in the lower right.
Right. I just thought
and
it'd be easier if I were bigger.
You're right. It would be.
Little messages keep popping up. If I were only taller. Okay, so we want to do the measuring thing. So Claire, you'll have to tell me if you can see this. Well, I'm going to use the female now this time. So here's my ruler. It doesn't have to be clear. So mine, is this showing up, Claire?
Yes. I
Okay.
mean, as best as a clear ruler
Yeah.
will. I think it's more just for the general process, not.
You can
see the
do,
tick
I don't
marks.
see any opaque ones. So, well, so here is, although now difficult to demonstrate, any ruler that you have, you can just hold the B in front of, okay? And then I usually will put the butt end or the head end on one of the major, what are they, diacritical marks? So like an even millimeter, big like 2 millimeters, no, not 2 millimeters, 10 millimeters. And then I will be able to see the, look at the hind end and look at where the millimeter mark matches up on that. And then in my mind, I'll say, okay, the abdomen's curled. I'm going to add another millimeter or 2 more millimeters. And then that'll be my best guess as to what the size of this bee is. But because it's in the guessing framework, I'm also going to bump that guess up 1 and down 1. So I would have if I said my best guess is 11 millimeters, I'm going to do 10, 11, 12 in the guide to bracket, to make sure that I bracket my answer, even though the guide has also bracketed its answers to be broad. Again, we don't care about the absolutes, we care about getting the right answer. So we're going to purposefully overscore, we would call it, specimens. Is that making sense? Did I explain that okay?
Let us know in the chat, or everybody can unmute if that is.
Oh, it was like
a flexible ruler to match the curve of the measuring.
Possibly, but I think what you would run into there is that you would run into that you would bust the specimens because they're going to be dry and brittle, and so maybe you could also do stuff digitally, I'm sure, with stretching out a line and stuff. But, at some point you're getting into, is all that effort worth it when the measurements are, on both the guide and your end are going to be general. So I would say don't bother. I would, though, use the ruler method to quickly get an estimate of size, buffer it with some answers, and use that. And then if you get into like, oh, whatever I do, I get down to just 2 genera or 2 species, then start looking at the individual species accounts, getting a sense of what the actual measurements have been, and go from there. So in the end, sometimes you have very ambiguous species in lazy glossums and Andrena and those kinds of things, and you're still, even though you've gone through all the characters, because of how you scored things or other features, you're still left with a couple different options if you're being careful. And so you have to then start weighing different things like ranges, times of year, what the species accounts say, maybe comparisons to museums. You would take the specimen and go into a museum and compare it to their collection. You could even send it off, or you could just wait and get a bunch more, hopefully more specimens of the same thing. And after a while, if you have a lot of anything, it usually becomes all of a sudden like clear what the species ID is.
Okay, well, we don't have any more questions coming through the chat. This is your last call. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, if
Thanks,
there's anybody
everyone.
on who missed the first few minutes, send me an email if you want a box of demo bees that you can use to follow along. It'll be random, but also helpful. Were there any other last minute announcements? We should have the recording more promptly in the future, and on getting a Teams up that will also help us organize these resources in one place for you. So if you get buried in emails, then you'll have them available.
Yeah, and just let us know if there's something in general that you would like to see that would be helpful. It's like, don't talk so fast, Sam, or Claire, you know, do whatever. That's fine too.
We're here for it. Okay. We ended at 2:06. That's good.
Amazing.
All right, everybody. No, the demo bees will probably not have both of a particular bee, but there should be males and females. They could.
Yeah.
But there should be examples of male and female bees in the box in general. I think maybe some of the bumblebees will have them. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now, and everybody have a great day.